Have you ever wondered what would happen if the love of your youth returned when you least expect it? Rosa came home after the worst day of her life. She'd quit her job, she had lost her dignity, and she was ready to close that chapter forever. But what she found in front of her door left her speechless. Her millionaire boss, the man who made her feel invisible in that mansion, was standing there with a bouquet of flowers in his hands and a look that she knew from another time, from another life. Stay until the end to discover the secret that he kept for years and that changed everything between them. The Mendoza mansion stood imposing on the hills of Monterey, with its white walls reflecting the morning sun. Rosa crossed the main gate at 6 o'clock, like every day for 3 months, with her impeccable uniform. She was not like the other maids who had passed through that house. She always arrived on time, she never left a plate unwashed. But there was something in the air of that house that worried her, an invisible tension that she could not understand. Rosa had learned since she was a child that people like her did not ask questions. She just did her job and returned home. She had to focus. She needed that job more than ever because her mother depended on her. She opened the window, took out the ingredients to prepare Mr. Juan's breakfast, and began to work in silence. While she was chopping the onion for the chilaquiles, she heard footsteps down the stairs and knew without having to turn around that it was him. Her heart took an inexplicable turn, like every time she knew he was close. Rosa hated that weakness. She hated feeling like that for a man who probably didn't even know her last name. She took a deep breath and forced herself to focus on the food, mentally repeating that he was just her boss. And that morning, Juan entered the kitchen with an expression that Rosa had never seen before. Juan Mendoza was only 28 years old, but he carried the weight of a family empire that made him seem much older. His father had died when he was 18, leaving him in front of a construction company that moved millions of pesos. Elena, his mother, had been in charge of shaping every aspect of his life since that moment. He had accepted everything without protesting, because that's how they had taught him. Because a Mendoza did not question family decisions. But lately, something inside him began to wake up. A concern that could not be silenced, no matter how hard he tried. Since Rosa had come to work at his house, Juan felt that something was wrong. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, that he was confusing the maid with someone he had met. But as the weeks went by, that feeling only intensified, becoming an uncomfortable certainty. He found himself looking for excuses to go down to the kitchen at unusual hours, to cross paths with her in the hallway. Elena noticed those changes almost immediately, because a mother always knows when her son begins to lose his way. Juan felt his mother's penetrating gaze on him during breakfast, evaluating every gesture. But when Rosa entered the dining room to remove the dishes, their eyes met for 3 seconds. Rosa felt that moment like a direct blow to the stomach, a discharge that forced her to lower her eyes immediately. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the empty coffee cup and prayed that no one would have noticed that little slip, because that was exactly what Elena thought at that precise moment, sitting at the table. The older woman was not stupid, nor was she blind. She had seen that dangerous spark in her son's eyes. Elena had worked too hard to build the perfect future for Juan, as to allow any girl to come and ruin him. It would not be the first time she saw those cheap strategies. She had fired 3 employees before for trying to flirt with her son. She pressed her lips into a thin line while watching Rosa leave the dining room with the tray full of dirty dishes. She would have to act soon, before the situation got out of control. Rosa placed the dishes in the sink and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions. She did not understand what was happening. Why did that man affect her so much? She opened the tap and began to wash with mechanical movements. But in the dining room, Elena was already planning her next move. The following days were filled with a growing tension that everyone at home could feel, but no one dared to mention it. Juan found more and more elaborate excuses to stay at home instead of going to the office. She felt that constant vigilance, like a weight on her shoulders, making each simple task a monumental challenge. Elena observed everything from her strategic position in the main room, pretending to read decorative magazines. The tension reached a critical point one afternoon when Juan went down to the kitchen, just when Rosa was preparing the food. Their hands touched during the transfer of a pot, a brief contact that lasted barely a second. Rosa backed away as if she had burned herself, murmuring an urgent apology while keeping her eyes on the floor. Juan stayed there a few more seconds, with his hands still extended in the air, trying to process what he had just felt. He did not have time to find out, because Elena appeared at the kitchen door with a cold expression that haunted the atmosphere. Juan left the kitchen without saying a word, climbing the stairs 2 by 2, while Rosa remained motionless in front of the stove. And Elena, from the door, smiled slightly, because now she had the evidence she needed to act. That night, after Rosa had left for her house, Elena entered Juan's studio without knocking. Juan looked up at the documents he pretended to review, knowing perfectly well what was coming, but without being prepared. His mother sat in front of him with that calculated elegance that had been perfected over decades of maintaining appearances. There were no screams or dramatic accusations. Elena was too sophisticated for that. Instead, she used measured words. She reminded him who he was, what last name he had, what responsibilities he had with the family business. She told him about his future, about the suitable wife who would someday occupy his place in that mansion. And then, without mentioning Rosa's name directly, she made it very clear that any inappropriate distraction with the household staff would be seen as a lack of respect. Juan listened in silence, with his jaw tense and his hands clasped in fists over the desk. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He just nodded his head when she finished her speech. He stood alone in the darkness of his office, looking out the window at the city lights. And for the first time in his adult life, Juan Mendoza wondered if obeying had always been the best decision. But while he struggled with his doubts, Rosa slept restlessly in her small house, dreaming with dark eyes. The transformation in Elena's behavior was subtle but devastating, like poison that slowly mixes in the water. The next day of the meeting in the kitchen, Rosa arrived at the mansion at her usual time, but found that her routine had been modified. Elena waited for her at the entrance with a new list of tasks, speaking with that polite tone that rich people used. Now Rosa had to start 2 hours early, which meant getting up at 4 in the morning. The areas that she had to clean were duplicated overnight, adding the guest rooms that no one used. Elena supervised each movement with an obsessive attention, appearing in the corners when Rosa least expected it. She never raised her voice. She never showed anger openly, but her words cut deeper than any scream. The young maid accepted everything without protesting, because she desperately needed that job, because her mother had fallen ill. But every day that passed, she felt her dignity eroding a little more. And the worst of all, was that Juan seemed to have become a ghost that avoided any space where she could be. Rosa did not know, but Juan was following the instructions that his mother had given him. He had returned to his previous routines, leaving early for the office and returning late at night. But that obedience cost him more than Elena could imagine, because every morning when he left his room, he had to make a conscious effort. He locked himself in his office in the center of Monterey and pretended to focus on contracts and projects. He tried to convince himself that his mother was right, that it was just a superficial attraction due to the stress of work. He mentally repeated that Rosa was just the maid, that he did not even really know her. But no matter how hard he tried to rationalize his feelings, he could not get those eyes out of his head. The nights were the worst, when he was left alone in his room, surrounded by luxuries that suddenly seemed empty to him. He thought of Rosa more than he should. He imagined conversations that he would never have. And while he fought against feelings that he did not understand, in the mansion, his mother tightened the circle more and more. The changes implemented by Elena gradually escalated over the next 2 weeks, each designed to make Rosa's life more difficult. The orders now arrived in the form of written notes left in strategic places in the house. Rosa had to reorganize the pantry completely, following a new classification system that no one else would ever use. The lunch that they used to allow her to eat in the kitchen now had to be done outside the house. When Rosa asked for permission to use the bathroom, Elena checked her watch with a disapproving expression. The other 2 employees who worked in the mansion, the cook and the gardener, noticed the different treatment, but kept silent. Rosa began to come home every night more exhausted than the previous day, with a sore body. Her mother noticed the change. She saw how her daughter stopped smiling during the simple dinners they shared. She asked her several times what was going on, if there was any problem at work, but Rosa only shook her head. She did not want to worry her mother with problems that did not have an apparent solution. But one afternoon, while cleaning Juan's studio, Rosa found something that would change everything. She was dusting the bookshelves when an old photo album fell to the ground. Rosa crouched down to pick it up, ready to close it and return it to its place. But something in one of the photos caught her attention. It was an image of a group of teenagers dressed in school uniforms, standing in front of a high school. She brought the photo to her eyes, looking desperately for those young faces. And then she saw it. A 15-year-old thin boy with the same dark eyes, standing in the 3rd row, next to a girl with long hair. Her hands trembled so much that she almost dropped the album again. Her breathing became irregular. Juan was not only her boss, he was Juanito, the quiet boy who sat 2 rows behind her in math class. It was the first love she had had, the first one who had taken her hand in the darkness of a school movie. Rosa felt the tears begin to roll down her cheeks without being able to stop them. She did not know what to do with that information. She did not know if he had recognized her either. She heard footsteps approaching the corridor and quickly closed the album, returning it to its place with trembling hands. But when she turned around, Elena was standing at the door of the studio, watching her with a cold expression. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any word that Elena could have pronounced at that moment. The older woman entered the studio with measured steps, closing the door behind her with a soft click. She did not ask what she was doing with the family album. She did not scream at her for touching things that did not belong to her. She simply approached the desk and sat in the leather chair that belonged to her son. She spoke then with a dangerously calm voice, more lethal than any explosion of anger. She told Rosa that she knew exactly what was happening, that she had seen how she looked at Juan. Elena was not stupid. She had seen that kind of strategy before. Young women who believed they could catch a rich man. She made it very clear to her that this would never happen while she was breathing, that her son was destined for much greater things. Rosa listened with her head down, feeling how each word hit her with the force of a physical slap. Elena continued, mentioning that it would be a shame for Rosa to lose her job in these difficult times. The implicit threat floated in the air: obey and keep your distance or face consequences. Rosa stood there without raising her eyes, murmuring a barely audible, "Yes, ma'am." Elena left the studio, leaving behind only the aroma of her expensive perfume. That night, Rosa cried until she fell asleep, knowing that she had to make a decision that would change her life. The next morning, Rosa dressed in her uniform for the last time. She pulled her hair up in that perfect braid that she had used for months. She took the 2 buses that took her to the Mendoza mansion, with her shoulders straighter than she had had in weeks. She entered the service door as usual, but instead of heading to her daily tasks, she went directly to look for Elena. She found her having breakfast quietly in the dining room, reading the financial newspaper in the morning, with that satisfied expression of someone who has everything under control. Rosa stood in front of her, with her chin raised and her hands firm on her sides, feeling how her heart was beating hard, but determined. She pronounced the words that she had mentally rehearsed all night, with a voice clearer than what she herself expected. "Mrs. Elena, I am here to submit my resignation effective as of today." She did not apologize. She offered no additional explanations. She simply handed over the keys to the house that she had been given on the first day. Elena looked up from the newspaper, her eyes evaluating Rosa, with a mixture of surprise and something that looked like involuntary respect. There was a moment of tense silence where both women held each other's gaze. A silent battle of wills that ended when Rosa turned around. She walked toward the exit with firm steps, feeling how, with every meter she advanced, she recovered a piece of her lost dignity. But what Rosa did not know was that Juan was watching the whole scene from the window of his room. Juan had returned home late the night before, after a business dinner that lasted longer than planned. He climbed the stairs without making a noise, avoiding waking his mother, and stayed awake until dawn, reviewing documents that he could not concentrate on reading. Something inside him told him that something was about to change, an inexplicable restlessness that kept him alert without understanding why. When dawn broke, instead of leaving early, as he had been doing the last few weeks, he decided to stay a while longer. He looked out the window, just in time to see Rosa walking down the main path toward the exit gate. There was something different in her posture, in the way she held her head high, even though she had clearly been crying. Juan felt a sharp pang in his chest, a sense of immediate loss that had no logical explanation, considering that he had barely spoken to her. He went down the stairs 2 by 2 without really thinking about what he was doing, only knowing that he could not let her go like that. But when he arrived at the dining room, Elena stopped him with a single look and 2 words. "Let her go." Juan stood paralyzed in the middle of the dining room, divided between the obedience of a lifetime and a new impulse that pushed him toward the door. Elena folded the newspaper with calculated movements, placing it on the table, before addressing her son with that voice she had used to raise him. She explained that Rosa had resigned of her own free will, that it was the best for everyone. that now he could focus on what really mattered. Juan listened to his mother's words, but for the first time in his life, he did not process them as absolute truths, but as opinions that could be questioned. He opened his mouth to protest, to say something, anything, but the words got stuck in his throat. Elena continued talking about the new employee she had already contacted, about the social commitments they had that week. But Juan was no longer listening. His mind was on that photo album he kept in his studio. That same afternoon, after Elena left for a social club meeting, Juan went up to his studio and looked for the album with trembling hands. He turned the pages slowly until he found that group photograph from middle school, that image he had seen 1,000 times without really paying attention to it. And then he saw her clearly, Rosa at 15 years old, standing next to him in that photo from more than a decade ago. The recognition hit him like lightning, all the pieces suddenly fitting into a puzzle that had been in front of him all this time. The memories came in waves, one after another, relentless and bright, as if they had been waiting to be released all this time. Juanito and Rosa at recess, sharing a sandwich because she had forgotten her lunch, and he pretended not to be hungry. The notes they passed during math class, silly messages about homework, and complaints about boring teachers that little by little became something more. That afternoon at the movies, when he finally gathered the courage to hold her hand, in the dark, feeling how his heart beat so hard that he was sure the whole world could hear it. The promise he made her when she told him crying that they would have to move to another neighborhood, that her father had died and they could no longer afford that school. He promised her that he would look for her, that they would find a way to stay in touch, that they would be friends forever. But then his own family moved to another city just 2 months later. When his father decided to expand the business, Juan had tried to look for her, had asked at school, but no one knew exactly where Rosa had gone. Over time, submerged in his new life of private high school and increasingly high family expectations, memories faded, until now, when everything returned with a devastating clarity that took his breath away. Juan closed the album and pressed it against his chest, feeling the tears rolling down his cheeks without caring. Rosa was not just the employee who made him feel strange. She was his first love, the only person who had known him when he was just Juanito. That night, Juan could not sleep, tossing and turning in his bed while his mind worked frantically, trying to process everything. He got up before dawn and went down to the kitchen to make himself a coffee, something he never did, because there was always someone to do it for him. While the water boiled, he made a decision that he knew would change everything. He would go look for Rosa. He would tell her the truth. He would ask for forgiveness for not having recognized her sooner. He had no idea where exactly she lived, but he remembered that her full address must be in the house personnel files. He went up to his mother's office with his heart racing, knowing that he was crossing a line, but not caring anymore. He found the file, memorized the address, and then heard Elena's footsteps coming down the stairs for her morning routine. He put everything away quickly and left the office just as she entered the dining room, their gazes meeting in a tense moment. Elena watched him, with those eyes that always seemed to see more than he wanted to reveal. But for the first time, Juan did not lower his gaze. He told her he had to leave early for an important business matter. A lie that both knew was a lie. Elena said nothing, only nodded slowly as she took her seat in her usual place at the table. And as Juan left the mansion with his car keys and a bouquet of flowers he bought at the first florist he found open, he felt that he was finally making a decision completely his own. Rosa arrived at her small house in the San Miguel neighborhood when the sun was just beginning to warm the dusty streets of that humble neighborhood. Her mother was preparing pot coffee in the kitchen, that comforting aroma that had always meant home to Rosa since she was a child. She took off her uniform for the last time and folded it carefully before storing it at the bottom of the closet, as if she were closing a painful chapter. Her mother looked at her with that quiet wisdom that years give, without asking uncomfortable questions, just offering her a cup of hot coffee. Rosa sat at the kitchen table and finally let the tears flow freely, all those emotions contained for weeks coming out in sobs. Her mother approached and hugged her, letting her cry without interrupting, just stroking her hair, like when she was little and had nightmares. When Rosa finally calmed down, she told her everything: the exhausting work, Elena's hostility, the discovery of the album, and that shared past. Her mother listened in silence, nodding occasionally, and when Rosa finished, she simply said something that would soothe her soul. "Daughter, sometimes God closes doors so that we learn to value ourselves, and other times He opens them when we least expect it." Rosa felt a weight lifted from her chest with those words, as if someone finally validated her decision to choose her dignity. But neither of them imagined that at that precise moment, Juan was parking his car in front of her house. Juan had driven through the unknown streets of that neighborhood, following the GPS directions with his heart beating faster and faster. The houses here were simple, modest, so different from the world of luxury in which he had grown up, that it almost seemed like another country. He found the address he was looking for, a small house with a metal fence and potted plants decorating the entrance. He sat in the car for several minutes, the bouquet of flowers on the passenger seat, trying to find the right words. What would he say to her? How would he explain that he hadn't recognized her for 3 months? How would he apologize for the treatment she had received in his house? He took a deep breath, took the flowers and got out of the car before fear made him change his mind. He rang the doorbell and waited, every second feeling like an eternity, while he heard movement inside the house. The door opened and an older woman appeared who must be Rosa's mother, her face showing surprise at seeing such a well-dressed man. Juan introduced himself politely, with that genuine respect his father had taught him before dying, and asked if Rosa was home. He explained that he needed to speak with her about something important that couldn't wait another minute. Rosa's mother evaluated him with her gaze for a few seconds before calling her daughter. When Rosa appeared at the door and saw Juan standing there with the bouquet of flowers in his hands, the whole world seemed to stop. Her eyes widened with disbelief, her mouth opened to say something, but no sound came from her lips. Juan looked at her with an intensity that she had never seen in him during all those months at the mansion. He took a step forward, extending the flowers toward her with hands that trembled slightly, and then spoke with a voice charged with emotion. "Rosa, I know who you are." The words hung suspended in the air between them, dense with meaning and possibilities that neither dared to name yet. Rosa felt her knees weaken. She had to lean on the doorframe to keep from falling at that revelation. Juan continued, his voice cracking slightly with each word. "You are the girl from middle school, the one who shared her lunch with me, the one who made me laugh." Rosa felt the tears running down her cheeks again. But this time they were not tears of pain, but of relief mixed with confusion. Juan took another step, shortening the distance between them until only inches separated them. I recognized you from the first day, but I couldn't remember from where." He extended his free hand toward her, not as a boss, but as the shy boy he had been so many years ago. "Forgive me for taking so long." Rosa took the bouquet of flowers with trembling hands, unable to believe that this was really happening. Rosa's mother signaled them with a gesture to come in, offering them privacy, but Rosa shook her head gently. She needed to be outside. She needed the fresh air and the open space to process what was happening in that moment. Juan and Rosa walked to the small front garden, sitting on the concrete stairs under the shade of a bougainvillea tree. For several minutes, neither said anything. They just looked at each other as if verifying that the other was real and not a dream. Finally, Juan began to speak, telling her everything. How he had looked for the photo album after she resigned. How the memories had returned. He told her about his life after moving, about how his father died, and he had to mature too quickly for his age. Rosa listened with her heart in her throat, feeling how every word of Juan resonated with her own jealously guarded memories. When it was her turn to speak, she told him about her father's death, about the economic difficulties they faced, about how she never forgot him. She admitted that from the first day she entered to work at the mansion, she felt that inexplicable connection that she could not understand or explain. "I thought it was just a feeling that my heart confused with something from the past," whispered Rosa, with her voice broken by emotion. Juan took her hand then, that simple gesture that had connected them so many years ago, in the darkness of a school theatre. And in that moment, both knew that what they felt was real as the sun shining above them. Juan confessed that he felt something deep for her since she arrived at his house, but that his mother had put up an impossible barrier. Rosa listened to all this without letting go of his hand, feeling a mixture of sadness and tenderness for the man Juan had become. Then she spoke with an honesty that surprised even herself. "Juan, I also feel something for you. I never stop feeling it." She paused, looking at their intertwined hands before continuing with courage. "But I cannot be the cause of a conflict between you and your mother." The words hurt coming out, but Rosa knew it was the truth she needed to say, no matter how much it hurt. Juan shook his head, squeezing her hand firmly. "My mother is wrong. I know it now with all clarity." But Rosa stopped him with a sad and wise look. "Elena is your family, the only thing you have left of your parents. You cannot lose her." They hugged then, a long hug that contained years of separation and a present full of obstacles that seemed impossible to overcome. When they finally separated, Rosa had wet cheeks, and Juan had bright eyes with tears he refused to let fall. He promised her that he would find a way to solve this, that he would talk to his mother, that he would not give up so easily. Rosa smiled sadly, touching his cheek with tenderness. "I don't want you to lose your family for me. I couldn't live with that guilt." Juan rose slowly from the stairs, knowing he had to return, but without wanting to break that magical moment they had shared. "I'm going to fix this, I promise you," he said, before walking away, while Rosa watched him leave with her heart divided between hope and fear. Juan returned to the mansion with a heart full of determination, but also fear for the conversation he had to have with his mother. Elena was waiting for him in the main room, seated in her favorite armchair, with a magazine she clearly wasn't reading. As soon as she saw him enter, she closed the magazine with a sharp snap and fixed her eyes on him, with that look she had used so many times to control him. Juan took a deep breath and sat in front of her, determined not to let fear paralyze him like before this time. He told her everything bluntly, that he had gone to look for Rosa, that he had recognized her as his friend from middle school, that he had remembered everything. Elena listened in silence, her face turning into an impenetrable mask that revealed no emotion. When Juan finished speaking, expecting some reaction, his mother finally broke the silence with an icy voice that cut more than any scream. She reminded him again of his responsibilities, the last name he carried, the expectations society had of him. She told him that what he felt was just misinterpreted nostalgia, a confusion between the past and the present. But for the first time in his life, Juan did not lower his head nor accept her words as absolute truths. Juan responded with a firmness that not even he knew he possessed inside himself. He explained that Rosa was not a stranger trying to take advantage of his money. She was someone who had known him when he was nobody important. He told her about those days in middle school, about how Rosa shared her lunch with him without knowing who he would become. He spoke to her of the promise they made as children, a promise that life had interrupted, but that his heart never forgot. Elena listened with an increasingly tense expression, her hands squeezing the arms of the chair until her knuckles turned white. She tried to interrupt him several times, but Juan continued talking, releasing years of stored words and unmade decisions. He told her that he respected everything she had done for him, all her dedication after his father's death. But he also made it clear that he was no longer a child who needed to be told how to live his life. Elena stood up abruptly, her perfect composure finally breaking under the weight of her son's unexpected rebellion. She warned him that if he continued down that path, he would have to face social consequences, rejection from their circles. "Let them say what they want," Juan replied with a calmness that surprised them both. "I don't care anymore what people think." The argument stretched for hours, with Elena using every argument she could think of to dissuade her son from that path. She spoke to him of class differences, of family expectations, of what his father would have wanted for him. Juan listened to everything with patience, but without yielding an inch in his newly discovered position. Finally, when the sun began to set outside, Elena played her last card. She gave him an ultimatum. If Juan insisted on pursuing that inappropriate relationship, she could not continue living under the same roof with him. The words fell like stones between them, heavy with implications that neither of the two had anticipated. Juan felt the sharp pain of that threat. The idea of losing his mother was devastating after everything they had been through together. But when he closed his eyes and thought of Rosa, of those eyes full of kindness, of that smile that had illuminated his adolescence, he knew he couldn't give her up again. He opened his eyes and looked at his mother with sadness, but also with resolution. "Mom, I love you more than anything in this world." He paused, the next words hurting as they left his mouth. "But I cannot live my life trying to please ghosts of the past." Elena paled at those words, understanding that she had lost the absolute control she had always had over her son. The following days at the mansion were tense and cold, with Elena and Juan moving like strangers under the same roof. Juan spent most of the time in his office, or leaving early to avoid uncomfortable encounters with his mother. Elena maintained her usual routine, but with a stiffness in her movements that revealed the internal battle she was fighting. Meanwhile, Juan visited Rosa every afternoon after work, bringing her different flowers every day, and sharing hours talking about everything and nothing. They talked about their separate lives during those lost years, about the different paths they had taken. Rosa told him about difficult jobs she had had, about how she had cared for her sick mother without ever complaining. Juan spoke to her about the constant pressure of managing an empire, about sleepless nights, worried about decisions that affected hundreds of employees. They discovered that, despite their very different worlds, they shared the same fundamental values: honesty, hard work, family loyalty. Each conversation brought them closer, weaving a connection that went beyond adolescent nostalgia. One afternoon, while walking through the park near Rosa's house, Juan took her hand and made an important confession. He told her he had made a decision. If his mother did not accept their relationship, he would seek his own path. Rosa stopped him then, her eyes full of concern. "Juan, I don't want you to destroy your family for me. I couldn't live with that guilt." Juan shook his head, squeezing her hand gently while searching for the right words to express what he felt. He explained that this wasn't just for her. It was for himself, for the man he wanted to be. He confessed that for years he had lived in a gilded cage, fulfilling expectations and following a script written by others. Knowing her again had shown him that there was another way to live, more authentic and true. Rosa listened with tears rolling down her cheeks, moved by the depth of his feelings, but also terrified by the implications. She reminded him that she had nothing to offer him but love, that she could not compete with the world to which he belonged. Juan stopped her by placing a finger gently on her lips, smiling with that tenderness that made her melt inside. He told her that she offered him exactly what he had been looking for all his life, without knowing it: honesty, authenticity, unconditional love. He told her then about a plan he had been forming in his mind during those difficult days at the mansion. He had started looking for houses in other states, places where they could start over, far from expectations and judgments. He proposed that when he found the perfect place, he would return for her to start that new chapter together. Rosa looked at him with amazement, mixed with love, unable to believe that someone was willing to sacrifice so much for her. They embraced under the tree in the park, sealing that promise with a kiss full of hope and determination that stole the breath from both of them. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions for Juan, as he secretly prepared his future. He had contacted real estate agents in Guadalajara, a city far enough from Monterrey to start over, but close enough. He organized everything from his office downtown, using every free moment to plan how he would build a different and authentic life. Rosa, for her part, had found a temporary job in a clothing store in the shopping center of her neighborhood. The salary was modest, but honest, and allowed her to help her mother while waiting for Juan to resolve his family situation. Every night, after both finished their respective work days, they met in the park or at Rosa's small house. They talked about the future with that mixture of excitement and nervousness that characterizes those who are about to take a big leap. Rosa still felt guilt for being the indirect cause of the conflict between Juan and Elena, although he insisted it wasn't so. He constantly repeated that this decision was about him finding his own voice, his own will, after years of living for others. One afternoon, Rosa received an urgent call while working at the store. It was a neighbor informing her that her mother had fallen. Rosa left everything and ran towards her home with her heart in her throat, praying it wasn't anything truly serious. When she arrived, she found her mother conscious but clearly weak, complaining of chest pain and difficulty breathing. Without thinking twice, Rosa called an ambulance and accompanied her mother to the nearest hospital in the area with trembling hands. The doctors examined her quickly, running tests and monitoring her vital signs, with serious expressions that boded no good. After what seemed like an eternity, a doctor came out to speak with Rosa, explaining that her mother had suffered a minor heart attack. She needed to remain hospitalized under observation for at least 72 hours, and afterwards would require medication and special care that would be expensive. Rosa listened to all this, feeling the world crashing down on her. Thinking of the medical costs she couldn't cover, she called Juan from the hospital hallway, her voice cracking as she told him what happened with desperation painted in every word. Juan arrived in less than 20 minutes, finding her sitting in the waiting room, with her face in her hands, crying. He hugged her without saying a word, letting her vent against his shoulder, while he stroked her hair with infinite tenderness and absolute patience. Juan took charge of everything immediately, speaking with the doctors, ensuring that Rosa's mother received the best care. He paid the medical expenses without blinking, ignoring Rosa's protests about never being able to pay him back that money in her life. During the 3 days Rosa's mother remained hospitalized, Juan was there every afternoon, after work, without fail. Rosa's mother, from her hospital bed, observed all this with eyes that saw much more than she said. She saw how her daughter looked at that young man. She saw the genuine tenderness with which he treated Rosa, expecting nothing in return. On the 3rd day, when the doctors discharged the lady, with clear instructions on medications and rest, she asked to speak alone with Juan. Rosa left them in the room, with curiosity and some concern, wondering what they would want to discuss in private without her presence. Rosa's mother looked at Juan with that wisdom that only years and difficult life experiences give. She thanked him for everything he had done for them, not only paying the medical expenses, but for the genuine respect with which he treated them. Juan tried to downplay it, saying it was the least he could do, but she stopped him with a gentle gesture of her hand. She told him she could clearly see that he loved her daughter, and that her daughter loved him, with the same deep intensity. But she also noticed that something was holding them back, something that didn't allow them to be completely happy together. Despite the evident love, Juan lowered his head, feeling the weight of the situation on his shoulders, and confessed everything with brutal honesty. He told her about the conflict with his mother, Elena, the ultimatum she had given him, his plans to move to another city to start over. Rosa's mother listened to everything attentively, nodding occasionally, and when Juan finished, she gave him advice he didn't expect to hear. She told him she understood the pain of losing a loved one. She herself had lost her husband and knew what it was like to be left alone. She suggested he try one last conversation with Elena, that sometimes the hardest hearts soften when we least expect it. Juan promised to think about it, although inside he doubted anything could change his mother's inflexible position after everything. Days later, Rosa went alone to the Mendoza mansion to collect her last salary that Elena had told her would be ready. Juan didn't know about this trip because he was in an important meeting he couldn't cancel at the central office. Rosa arrived at the mansion with mixed feelings, memories of the months she worked there, mixing with everything that had happened. She rang the service bell as she used to do, expecting one of the other maids to open the entrance door. But to her surprise, it was Elena who appeared on the other side, her face showing an expression difficult to interpret clearly. She ushered her in with a polite gesture, indicating for her to follow her to the office, where the envelope with her final payment was. Rosa walked behind her in silence, feeling the tension in the air, like a physical presence between both women. They reached the office, and Elena handed her the envelope, but before Rosa could leave, the older woman suddenly brought a hand to her chest. Her face contracted in a grimace of intense pain. Her breathing became irregular and heavy, in an alarming and dangerous way. Rosa watched as Elena swayed, and without thinking twice, ran to hold her before she fell to the marble floor. She helped her sit in the nearest armchair, immediately recognizing the symptoms she had just seen in her own mother days ago. Rosa grabbed her phone and dialed emergency services while she began to loosen Elena's tight clothing to help her breathe better. Elena tried to speak, her lips moving without emitting sound, her hand clutching Rosa's arm with the desperate strength of someone who feels life slipping away. Rosa spoke to her with a calm voice, telling her everything would be fine, that help was on the way, that she should try to breathe slowly. She remembered the instructions she had received at the hospital regarding first aid for heart attacks and began to apply them methodically without hesitation. She placed Elena in a more comfortable position. She completely loosened her clothes. She spoke to her constantly to keep her conscious and alert. When Elena began to lose consciousness, Rosa didn't hesitate for a second. She began chest compressions with the correct technique. 1, 2, 3, 4. She counted mentally while pressing Elena's chest with the adequate force and rhythm she had seen. She alternated compressions with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, praying internally that the ambulance would arrive soon before it was too late. The minutes felt like eternal hours, every second crucial, while Rosa fought to keep alive the woman who had made her life so difficult. Finally, she heard sirens approaching, paramedics entering quickly and taking control of the situation with efficient professionalism. One of them told Rosa, while they prepared Elena for transport, "Miss, your first aid probably saved her life." Rosa accompanied the ambulance to the hospital, calling Juan from the road to tell him what had happened with a trembling voice. And while the ambulance wheels rolled through the streets of Monterrey, Elena kept her eyes closed, but her hand remained clutching Rosa's. If you are liking this story, don't forget to like this video. Juan arrived at the hospital 20 minutes after receiving Rosa's call, his heart beating wildly throughout the journey. He found Rosa in the waiting room, still with her hair messy from the effort of saving Elena. She stood up upon seeing him and ran into his arms, trembling as she told him with a broken voice everything that happened. She explained how she had found Elena in the office, how she had dialed emergency services and started chest compressions. Juan listened with eyes full of tears, hugging her tightly as if she were a treasure he had just recovered. A doctor came out then from the emergency room, his face serious, but with a touch of relief in his eyes. He informed Juan that Elena had suffered an acute heart attack, but thanks to immediate first aid, she had survived. "If your friend hadn't acted so quickly, your mother wouldn't be alive right now," said the doctor firmly. Juan turned to see Rosa, with an expression mixing gratitude, love, and awe for what she had done. Rosa just shook her head humbly, saying anyone would have done the same in that emergency situation. The doctors explained that Elena would need to remain in intensive care for at least 48 hours under constant observation. Juan settled in the waiting room, refusing to go home while his mother fought for her life. Rosa stayed with him that whole first night, bringing him coffee and holding his hand during the most difficult moments. And while the hours passed slowly, Juan understood that Rosa had demonstrated a nobility of spirit that surpassed any social difference. On the third day, when doctors finally allowed Juan to enter to see his mother, he found Elena awake but weak. She was connected to various monitors, her pale face contrasting with the white hospital sheets completely surrounding her. Elena looked at him with eyes that seemed to have aged years. In just a few days, all her previous arrogance disappeared completely. Juan sat next to her bed, taking her hand carefully, not knowing exactly what to say in such a fragile moment. Elena was the one who broke the silence, her voice hoarse from the tubes inserted during the initial emergency. "Juan, I need to tell you something I've been keeping all these days," she whispered with effort while trying to sit up slightly. She told him then that she had been conscious throughout the time Rosa gave her the saving first aid. She had felt the panic in her own body, the sensation that life was slipping away like sand between her fingers. But she had also felt Rosa's firm hands working to save her, her calm voice telling her everything would be fine. In that moment of absolute vulnerability, Elena understood something she had stubbornly denied for whole weeks of family conflict. Rosa was not an opportunist trying to trap her son. She was a genuinely good woman with a noble heart. "She saved my life, Juan, without hesitating for a second. Despite everything I made her suffer," Elena confessed. Tears began to roll down her cheeks as she continued speaking, with her voice increasingly broken by emotion. Juan squeezed his mother's hand, feeling how something fundamental changed between them in that moment of brutal honesty. Elena asked to see Rosa. She needed to speak with her personally before it was too late to rectify her mistakes. Juan went out to look for her and found her in the waiting room, dozing in an uncomfortable chair after another sleepless night. He woke her gently and explained that his mother wanted to see her, that there was something important she needed to tell her urgently. Rosa got nervous, fearing Elena would blame her in some way for what happened or for her relationship with Juan. But Juan reassured her with a smile, taking her hand and guiding her toward the room where Elena waited with anxiety. When Rosa entered, Elena looked at her with eyes that no longer contained coldness or judgment, only deep gratitude and sincere regret. "Rosa, thank you for saving my life, when you could have let me die. After everything I did to you," Elena began. Rosa shook her head quickly, approaching the bed. "Mrs. Elena, I could never do something like that, no matter what happened." Elena smiled weakly, extending her trembling hand toward Rosa, who took it without hesitating for a moment of hesitation. She asked for forgiveness for every humiliation, for every cruel word, for every attempt to separate her from Juan without any valid reason. She explained she had been so afraid of losing her son that she couldn't see that Rosa was exactly what he needed. "You are a noble, hard-working woman, with a heart bigger than all the mansions in the world combined," said Elena with a sincere voice. Rosa cried silently, moved by words she never thought she'd hear from the woman who had been her greatest obstacle. Elena then did something that left both young people completely surprised. She gave them her blessing to be together without further impediments. Juan and Rosa looked at each other with disbelief, unable to believe the biggest obstacle had finally vanished like morning fog. Elena continued speaking, explaining to them that this experience had shown her how fragile and short life really was. "I don't want to waste the time I have left keeping apart two people who clearly love each other," she confessed sincerely. With a weak voice, She told them she had spent the last few days reflecting on her own life, on the decisions she had taken out of pride. She acknowledged that after her husband's death, she'd clung too much to Juan, trying to control every aspect of his existence. She had projected onto him her own dreams and ambitions without ever asking him what he really wanted for himself. I have been selfish and almost lost my son because of my stubbornness and my inability to accept that he is already an adult man. Rosa moved closer and hugged Elena gently, telling her the important thing was that now everything could change for the better. Elena returned the hug with the little strength she had, feeling years of rigidity melt in that simple gesture. Juan observed the scene with tears rolling freely down his cheeks, seeing how two worlds finally united in peace. Elena looked at them both and smiled. "Rosa, I ask you to take care of my son, because now I see no one could do it better." Rosa nodded, promising with all her heart that she would love and take care of Juan as he deserved to be loved all his life. "And Juan," Elena continued, "take care of this wonderful woman God put in your path when you needed her most without knowing it." And in that hospital room, a broken family finally began to heal for real, thanks to the power of genuine forgiveness. The following days were of gradual recovery for Elena, while doctors adjusted her treatment and monitored her constant progress. Juan and Rosa visited her together every afternoon, bringing her fresh flowers and telling her stories that made her smile sincerely for the first time. Elena asked them about their shared history, about those middle school days that had been the origin of all this love. She listened fascinated as they told her about notes in class, teenage promises, and separation forced by circumstances. "True love always finds its way back," said Elena one afternoon, looking at them with maternal tenderness she had never shown before. When she was finally discharged 2 weeks later, Elena insisted that Rosa and her mother come to dinner at the mansion. It was a simple dinner, but full of warmth, so different from the formal and cold meals that used to be held in that house. Elena also apologized to Rosa's mother for investigating her private life without permission and for using that information as a threat. The two mothers talked for hours, discovering they had more in common than their different circumstances suggested at first glance. Both had lost their husbands too soon. Both had fought alone to raise their children the best they could. Elena admitted she had judged Rosa for her humble origin, without seeing that true wealth is in character. Money can buy many things, but it cannot buy the nobility of spirit your daughter demonstrated by saving me, said Elena. Rosa's mother accepted the apologies with grace, saying forgiveness was the only path to true peace. And Juan, observing everything from the entrance of the mansion, knew he could finally build the future he had always dreamed of. The following weeks were of deep transformation for everyone involved in this story that seemed taken from a fairy tale. Elena began attending therapy, working on letting go of excessive control and learning to trust her son's decisions. She discovered that when she stopped trying to direct every aspect of Juan's life, their relationship improved enormously naturally. She started spending time with Rosa, teaching her things about household management and listening to her fresh ideas about life. Rosa, for her part, never lost her humility nor her authentic essence, despite the dramatic change in her personal circumstances. She continued visiting her mother regularly, helping in the small house and staying connected with her roots and her original community. Elena watched all this with growing admiration, understanding she had completely underestimated this extraordinary young woman all that time. One day, Elena asked Rosa to accompany her to the doctor for a routine checkup that made her nervous. Rosa accepted without hesitation, holding her hand throughout the consultation, as if they were mother and daughter for real. On the way back, Elena confessed something she had been keeping since her recovery in the hospital days ago. "Rosa, when I was on the brink of death, God showed me my purpose wasn't to control, but to love and support." She told her she now understood her role as a mother wasn't to choose Juan's path, but to walk beside him. "And you taught me that with your example, saving my life when you had every right to let me die for how I treated you." Elena hugged her then, thanking God for putting this exceptional woman in their lives when they needed her most. Juan, finally freed from crushing expectations, began to rediscover who he really was, beyond the last name and family money. He continued running the company successfully, but now found balance between work and personal life, which he had always neglected. He spent his afternoons with Rosa, exploring the city together, visiting places he had never known despite living there. Rosa showed him her Monterey, the one of popular markets, neighborhood taco stands, and parks where common people gathered. Juan discovered a cultural richness in those simple places that all the elegant dinners in the world had never shown him. He learned to appreciate small things: a coffee shared at dawn, a walk without a destination, a conversation without a hidden agenda. Rosa taught him that happiness wasn't in material things, but in moments shared with people we love. One afternoon, while walking through the park where they had reunited months ago, Juan stopped under the same bougainvillea tree. He knelt in front of Rosa, pulling out a simple but beautiful ring he had chosen himself, without help from expensive jewelers. "Rosa, you knew me when I was just Juanito, a boy without fortune or expectations, and accepted me just as I was then," he began. "Now that I am Juan, with all that implies, you accept me the same, always seeing my heart before my last name." He asked her to marry him, not to fulfill social expectations, but because he couldn't imagine his life without her. Rosa cried with pure joy, saying yes 1,000 times, while he slipped the ring onto her trembling finger. And in that perfect moment, under the same tree where they had sealed their promise before, they officially began their new life together. Elena insisted on organizing an engagement dinner, but this time with a spirit completely different from her previous events. She invited Rosa's family, close friends from both worlds, creating a warm atmosphere, mixing both realities without pretenses. During dinner, Elena stood up to give a speech that left everyone present deeply moved. She spoke about how she had been blinded by pride and appearances, forgetting what really mattered in life. She told how Rosa had saved her life without hesitation, proving to her that character is worth more than any title or bank account. "This humble young woman taught me more about true love in a moment of crisis than all my decades of supposed wisdom." She raised her glass to Rosa. "Welcome officially to our family, not as an employee, but as the daughter I never had." Rosa stood up and hugged Elena amidst tears, finally sealing the peace between them publicly and definitively. Rosa's mother also spoke, thanking God for guiding her daughter back to the love of her youth. "Sometimes love needs time to mature, like fine wine, so we can appreciate it in its maximum splendor," she said wisely. The guests toasted the couple, blessing their union and celebrating that love had triumphed over all obstacles placed. That night, when everyone left, Juan, Rosa, and Elena stayed on the terrace watching the stars over Monterey. Elena told them stories about Juan's father, about how he had always valued kindness over social status. "Your father would be proud of you, Juan, for choosing with your heart," Elena said, while the three remained in comfortable silence. Wedding preparations began with a completely new energy, full of genuine joy instead of rigid social obligations. Rosa wanted something simple and intimate, but Elena insisted they should celebrate appropriately, without falling into the empty ostentation of before. They found a perfect middle ground, a beautiful ceremony but with meaning, where every detail reflected the couple's unique story. Elena and Rosa's mother worked together on preparations, an unthinkable collaboration months ago, but now natural and full of affection. Juan took charge of every detail, with the same dedication he put into his businesses, wanting everything to be perfect for Rosa. They chose to marry in a small chapel on the outskirts of Monterey, a humble place, but full of peace and spiritual beauty. Rosa wore a simple but elegant dress Elena had helped choose, always respecting the bride's natural style. On the wedding day, while Rosa prepared with her mother and Elena, the three women cried together with pure happiness. "I never thought this day would come, that I would find my Juanito again after so many lost years," Rosa confessed. Elena arranged her veil with affectionate hands. "True love is never lost. It just waits for the right moment to bloom completely." The ceremony was emotional and deeply meaningful, with vows written by themselves that made everyone present cry. Juan promised to love and respect her every day of his life, no matter what storms came in the uncertain future. Rosa promised to be by his side always, being his partner in joys and his support in difficulties, no matter what. When the priest declared them husband and wife, everyone applauded while they kissed, sealing their eternal commitment. The reception was in the mansion gardens, transformed for the occasion into a magical space combining elegance with warmth. There was traditional Mexican music mixed with modern songs, creating a festive atmosphere where all guests felt sincerely welcome. Elena danced with Juan, telling him in his ear how proud she was that he had become the man his father dreamed of. Rosa's mother danced with her new in-laws, thanking the second chance life had given everyone. When it was time for the bride and groom's dance, Juan and Rosa moved in perfect sync under the bright stars. "Do you remember when I told you in middle school that someday we would dance at our wedding?" whispered Juan in her ear with tenderness. "I remember perfectly. And look, here we are, fulfilling that childhood promise I never thought would come true." Rosa replied. They spun together while the music enveloped them, two souls who had waited more than a decade to reunite again and forever. Elena watched from her table with tears of happiness, thanking God for giving her a second chance to rectify her mistakes. She had learned that simple people can have extraordinary hearts, that love doesn't understand social classes or money. She had discovered that letting go of control didn't mean losing her son, but gaining him in a deeper and more authentic way. And above all, she had learned that sometimes life sends us teachers disguised as humble people to teach us important lessons. As the party continued under the starry sky of Monterey, Elena raised her glass in a silent toast to the sky. And in that moment of deep gratitude, Elena finally understood that true wealth is not in mansions, but in love. The months following the wedding were of adjustment and discovery, while Juan and Rosa built their life together with love. Juan, had kept his promise to buy a house in Guadalajara, a beautiful place where they planned to spend seasons away from the hustle. But something unexpected happened. Elena asked them not to leave, to stay in Monterrey, close to her. I have lost too many years trying to control instead of enjoying. I don't want to waste more time separated from you, Elena confessed. Juan and Rosa accepted, deciding to stay in the city, but establishing healthy boundaries for their new forming family. They bought their own house near the mansion, a space that was completely theirs, where they could create their own traditions. Rosa continued working. She had opened a small clothing store in her old neighborhood, helping other women of limited resources. Juan supported her completely, even helping with the business finances, without taking away the merit of her personal effort. Elena visited the store regularly, surprised by Rosa's dedication and commitment to helping her community of origin. One afternoon, while drinking coffee in the new house, Juan gave unexpected news to Rosa, with shining eyes. I have something to show you, something I've been preparing in secret during the last few weeks, without you knowing, he said mysteriously. He took her in the car to the outskirts of the city, to a large plot of land Rosa didn't recognize. There, under construction, was a modern building with a sign saying, Rosa Mendoza Community Center for Education and Trades. Rosa covered her mouth with her hands, tears rolling down her cheeks, as she understood what Juan had done. I want women in your community to have opportunities, to learn trades and be able to get ahead, like you did, Juan explained. Rosa hugged Juan tightly, overwhelmed by the generous gesture honoring her roots, without making her feel charity, but respect. The center would offer free courses in sewing, cooking, computing, and small business administration for women of limited resources. Elena had been part of the project, donating money and contacts to make the dream of helping the community come true. Your kindness inspired me to use my resources for something more meaningful than empty parties and superficial appearances, Elena confessed. Rosa was deeply moved, seeing how her story had transformed not only her life, but that of many other women. The center opened its doors 3 months later, with an emotional ceremony where Rosa cut the inaugural ribbon with trembling hands. Dozens of women from the neighborhood attended, many of them childhood friends of Rosa, who congratulated her with tears. Rosa gave a brief but powerful speech. Never forget where you come from, but also don't let that define how far you can go. The women applauded, inspired by someone who had lived their same struggles, and now extended her hand to help them. Elena observed everything from a corner, her heart full of pride for the woman she had judged so unfairly months ago. Juan took Rosa's hand while they watched the first students entering the center, with hope on their faces. This is more valuable than any mansion or bank account, whispered Rosa, squeezing her husband's hand with gratitude. Elena approached them and hugged them both. You taught me that the true legacy is not assets, but transformed lives. And in that moment, the three knew they had found a purpose larger than themselves in helping others. One night, 2 months after the center's opening, Rosa felt a strange discomfort she couldn't explain with words. Juan, worried, insisted on taking her to the doctor, first thing in the morning, to rule out any health problem. After various tests and a wait that seemed eternal, the doctor entered with a smile on his face. Congratulations, Mrs. Mendoza. You are approximately 8 weeks pregnant, announced the doctor with evident joy in his voice. Rosa and Juan looked at each other with disbelief first, then with explosive happiness that made them hug and cry together. They were going to be parents. Their love would bear fruit in a new life that would be raised with all the values both treasured. That afternoon they went together to tell the news to Elena, who upon hearing it, broke into uncontrollable tears of pure happiness. "I'm going to be a grandmother. God is blessing me with a second chance to do things right," said Elena excitedly. They also visited Rosa's mother, who upon finding out hugged her daughter with tears. "Your father would be so proud." The months of pregnancy were of preparation and joy, with Elena and Rosa's mother pampering Rosa constantly. Juan became even more protective, ensuring Rosa rested enough and didn't overdo it at work. Rosa remained active in the community center, but now with a more relaxed schedule allowing her to care for her baby. Elena organized a beautiful baby shower, gathering people from all social strata in an authentic celebration. "This baby will be raised with love, humility, and values, the best of both worlds," declared Elena in front of all guests. The birth was on a December night, under a starry sky that seemed to celebrate the arrival of new life. Rosa gave birth to a beautiful girl with dark eyes like her father and a sweet smile that illuminated the whole room. They named her Esperanza Elena, honoring the name of the grandmother who had learned to love without conditions or expectations. Elena held her granddaughter for the first time with tears rolling down her cheeks, marveling at that small and perfect miracle. "I promise you, I will be the grandmother my son needed me to be as a mother," she whispered to the sleeping baby. Rosa's mother also met her granddaughter, blessing little Esperanza with words full of faith and love. The first months with the baby were exhausting, but full of indescribable joy illuminating every corner of the house. Juan was a dedicated father, getting up at night to help with bottles and diaper changes without complaining. Rosa discovered in motherhood a fullness she had never imagined possible, a different and deep love for her daughter. Elena visited almost daily, helping with the baby and learning to be the loving grandmother she had promised to be. One afternoon, while the 3 generations of women sat in the garden, with Esperanza asleep in Rosa's arms, Elena spoke. "You know, this girl will grow up knowing a love story that overcame all obstacles, that will be her greatest family inheritance." Rosa smiled, rocking her daughter gently, "And she will learn that differences don't matter when love is true and sincere." Juan watched them from the window, his heart full of gratitude for the miracle that was his united and happy family. 5 years passed like a sigh, full of simple moments, building solid and lasting happiness for the family. Esperanza had grown, becoming a curious and affectionate girl who adored spending time with her 2 grandmothers equally. The community center had flourished beyond expectations, helping hundreds of women find economic independence and dignity. Rosa divided her time between her family, the center, and precious moments building memories for a lifetime. Juan continued running the family business, but now with a more human approach, implementing social programs for his employees. Elena had become the loving matriarch her family needed, having learned the most important lessons of her life. One afternoon, the complete family gathered at the mansion to celebrate Esperanza's birthday with a simple party. There were children from all social strata playing together in the garden, something unthinkable in Elena's previous times. While watching the children play, Rosa leaned on Juan's shoulder with a smile of absolute satisfaction. "Did you ever imagine we would end up here when you were just Juanito in middle school?" asked Rosa with tender nostalgia. Juan kissed her forehead. "No, but my heart always knew you were special. It just needed time to remember it completely." Elena approached with Esperanza by the hand, the girl running toward her parents with a smile that illuminated everything. "Mommy, Daddy, Grandma Elena told me you met when you were children like me," said Esperanza curiously. Rosa picked her up. "That's right, my love. And that story taught us that true love always finds its way back." While the sun began to hide over Monterey, painting the sky oranges and pinks, the family sat together on the terrace. Elena took the floor, looking at everyone with eyes full of wisdom, gained through pain and personal transformation. "I want you to know that you saved me not only physically, that day in the office, but spiritually every day since then." She told how she had lived years trapped in appearances and expectations that had made her forget what really mattered in life. "Rosa, you taught me that a person's value is not in their bank account, but in the nobility of their heart. Juan, you showed me that being strong sometimes means having the courage to choose love over others' expectations. And Esperanza, you give me every day a new opportunity to do things right, to love without conditions or control." Rosa's mother, who was also present, added her own words of wisdom accumulated during years of struggle. "Sometimes God closes doors. We think we need to open windows towards something much better we never imagined possible. You two were lost for years, but when you reunited, it was at the perfect moment, when both were ready to love each other well." Juan hugged Rosa tighter, remembering the whole road traveled from that day in the kitchen to this perfect moment. Esperanza, without completely understanding the depth of the conversation, felt the love surrounding her and smiled with pure happiness. Elena stood up, raising her glass of juice. "I toast to this family that taught me it is never too late to change. To Rosa, who saved my life and my soul with her unwavering kindness, even in the face of the cruelty I showed her. To Juan, who had the courage to choose true love over the expectations of a superficial and empty society." Months later, on a quiet afternoon, Rosa received a call that made her cry with emotion and genuine pride. The community center had been recognized at the state level for its transforming impact on the lives of hundreds of women. They offered to expand the project to other cities, replicating the successful model they had created with so much love and dedication. Rosa convened a family meeting to discuss this opportunity that could change the lives of thousands more women. Juan supported her immediately. "Do this. It is your purpose. I will take care of everything else while you change the world, little by little." Elena also committed to helping, offering resources and contacts to grow the project on a larger scale. "This is what money should do. Transform lives, not just accumulate in bank accounts without real purpose," declared Elena. Together they began the expansion, opening 3 more centers in different cities during the next year, with great measurable success. Rosa became a recognized figure in social aid circles, giving conferences on overcoming and human dignity. But she never forgot her roots, always returning to her original neighborhood, visiting childhood friends who remained there. Juan accompanied her on those trips, teaching Esperanza that humility and gratitude were values more important than any luxury. One night, after a long day of work at the original center, Rosa and Juan walked through the same park where everything had begun. They sat under the bougainvillea tree, the same place where Juan had proposed marriage years ago, with a simple ring. Do you know what is the most beautiful thing about our story? Rosa asked, leaning on her husband's shoulder with happy fatigue. That we don't need a fairy tale ending, because every day with you is better than any fantasy I could imagine. Life continued its natural course, bringing challenges and joys in equal measure for this family that had learned to stay together. Esperanza grew up listening to her parents' story, learning that true love requires courage, patience, and above all, sincere humility. Elena lived to see her granddaughter graduate from elementary school, her eyes full of proud tears for the kind girl growing up. The community center continued expanding, eventually reaching 10 different cities and changing thousands of lives forever with real opportunities. Rosa never stopped being the humble and hardworking woman she had been, despite now having resources she never dreamed of possessing. Juan became a respected businessman, not only for his financial success, but for his genuine commitment to social responsibility. And Elena, in her last years, was remembered not for her elegant parties, but for her transformation into a defender of the most needy. One afternoon, many years later, Rosa returned to the mansion she had cleaned as an employee so many years ago, with mixed feelings. Now she was part of the family, but she never forgot the difficult days that had strengthened her and prepared her for this destiny. She stood in the kitchen, where everything had begun, remembering the first day she saw Juan, without recognizing him after so many years. Thank you, God, for closing that door in middle school to be able to open this much better window years later, she whispered with gratitude. Juan found her there, hugging her from behind. Everything had to happen exactly as it happened for us to get here together. The suffering, the separation, the reunion, everything was part of the perfect plan to forge our love the right way, he added. Rosa turned around and kissed him. That same kiss that sealed their love every day since they reunited under impossible circumstances. And while the sun set over the city of Monterey, they knew their story was living proof that love always wins. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Juan and Rosa teach us that true love knows no social class barriers, that humility and kindness are worth more than any fortune, and that it is never too late to rectify our mistakes when we act with the heart. Their story reminds us that sometimes God closes doors to open much better windows, that forgiveness has the power to transform lives, and that true wealth lies in the people we love and the lives we touch positively. May God bless your life with a love as pure and true as Juan and Rosa's, and may you always find the courage to choose the heart over appearances. May the Lord illuminate your path and guide you toward the people destined to transform your life with their kindness, just as Rosa transformed the life of the entire Mendoza family with her noble and generous heart. Amen.